Hello, and welcome back to my garden here in Portland, Oregon. Today we're going to focus on a crucial aspect of gardening, watering. Portland's climate presents some unique challenges, and knowing how to water your garden effectively can make all the difference in keeping our plants healthy and thriving. Come along, and I'm going to discuss how I water the garden. Portland enjoys a mild, temperate climate with wet winters and dry summers, and during the summer months, rainfall can be scarce. It actually rained today, but it's been a few weeks, and that makes it essential to provide the garden with adequate water. Understanding when and how much water is key to maintaining a healthy garden, so that's what we're going to be talking about today.
The goal is to keep the soil consistently moist but not waterlogged. Overwatering can lead to root rot and other issues, while underwatering can stress your plants and reduce their productivity.
I know, it sounds complex, but I'm going to walk you through what I do, and you'll get the hang of it over time. It's one of those things that you have to learn to do. I was recently interviewing almost a garden nursery owner, somebody who's been in the business for an entire career, probably 40 years or more, now elderly. And in that business, he mentioned that watering was like the key activity that he still himself was involved in, and that it was very critical, and that it took a lot of time and training. It wasn't something that he could have temporary labor do, or even some of his longer term but part-time employees do. So I think that that's the thing to keep in mind, is that sometimes watering is presented as something that you hook up some irrigation systems and you automate the whole thing, and that's that, and you're done. But it's really one of the most critical components of raising plants if you're going to go from seedling all the way to in the ground. And so I encourage you to treat it with the importance that it deserves without being afraid of it. So is the best time to water your garden early in the morning? Well, it is for me. Watering in the morning allows plants to absorb moisture before the heat of the day sets in. That's going to reduce evaporation, ensure that water actually reaches the roots where it's needed most. And really, in this hot weather, it's also when I'm going to be out here. Evening watering is also an option, but it can increase the risk of fungal diseases if the foliage remains damp overnight. Morning watering is generally considered the best practice for that reason. That being said, while that's a risk, I often end up watering in the evening because something happened in my morning, didn't let me get out here and garden. I wait till the evening when it's cooler again, and then that's when I end up watering. And I haven't really experienced any issues from having done that. Probably because when I'm watering my garden here in Portland, Oregon, it's when we're in the hottest parts of the summer and it's pretty warm. Sometimes it stays very warm overnight. So it just isn't a thing that watering in the evening has created a fungal problem for me. But most of the books and literature out there that you might see about this will mention that. And I have to believe, or I do believe, that it does happen for some people. It is a problem, so just keep that in mind. There are several efficient watering techniques that can help you make the most of your water. Let's start with drip irrigation. Drip irrigation systems deliver water directly to the base of the plants, minimizing evaporation and runoff. This garden here was actually my first garden over a decade ago. I had drip irrigation set up, but I preferred using the little micro sprinklers and misters over the real drip emitters. It was set up to be automated with timers and the whole shebang, but honestly, I probably won't do that now.
My experience is that because I grow a lot of annuals and I move plants around every season, I would spend weeks of my gardening season just setting up and then constantly trying to optimize the emitters and the drippers, trying to ensure that there weren't any spots of missing water.
I figure drip is a good idea if you aren't tending your garden regularly anyway, or you have a large garden to water. For me, since I plan to be out here daily, and this garden is small enough, it's easier and more flexible for me to just move the hose around. If the garden is large enough, it might take all your gardening time just to move around the hose, in which case some kind of irrigation would be helpful. For my large garden you saw in previous videos, I used sprinklers attached to above ground polytubing. It was a semi-permanent solution, had various zones laid out, and they were covered by sprinkler heads so I could just turn on the water. I still didn't use timers because I was out there every day, so I could just turn on a zone while I was working in another zone and rotate my way around the garden throughout the week that way. The polytubing being above the ground instead of in-ground irrigation meant I could easily tweak the layout of my system and change things from season to season as I rotated plantings. Another method for more semi-permanent irrigation is using soaker hoses. These porous hoses release water slowly along their length, providing deep watering directly to the soil. You lay them around your plants and you cover them with mulch to reduce further evaporation. You can even get soaker lines that hook up to your drip irrigation line. After all that, though, for this small garden, I'm planning to just do hand watering. Maybe we'll all laugh about this later if you see me switch up to an irrigation system of some sort in a future video, but really, I think hand watering is a reasonable and effective method for small gardens like this. Some would say I'm not really hand watering because I'm going to be using a hose. The real hand watering purists use a watering can. I like using the watering can. It's especially convenient for areas that can't be easily reached by the hose. I'm using a 100-foot retractable hose. There are several brands for these now. I've got this one off Amazon. They're relatively spendy, and many things that you could pay more for in the garden aren't worth it from a utility perspective. You know, it's like if something is designed for the garden in retail, it has a premium, like buying garden stakes instead of fence posts, or wood for the garden instead of from a lumber yard. At least that's how I feel.
But in this case, I would say the extra cost of this contraption is worth it. If you've never worked with hoses, you may be imagining something that just automatically wheels in your hose, like when you're off and running doing something else. Wouldn't that be nice? I'm sure something like that's coming, but while yes, you do have to stand there and maybe get guided in, it's still so much better than pulling a 100-foot hose line yourself. So I rate this as a good-to-have gadget if and when you have the budget for it.
Whether you use a watering can or a hose, you want to water slowly and deeply as few times as you can while keeping the soil appropriately moist. That's as opposed to watering fast and shallow, which, depending on the quality of your soil, could just run off and never get to the roots of your plants. And if the water is not getting down into the ground, creating a reservoir, then you aren't encouraging your plants to grow deeper roots. Deeper roots generally can lead to stronger, more resilient plants, and so we like to encourage deep root growth. Mulching is an excellent way to conserve moisture in the soil. I haven't applied mulch in this garden for years. A good layer of organic mulch, I generally prefer compost, will help retain moisture, suppress weeds, and keep the soil temperature stable. Also, the dry, hard clay that is exposed along my row of fruit trees here, paired with the topography of an extreme slope, means that when I water, much gets wasted in runoff. Getting some mulch down here would help, but I'm reluctant to do that until I'm ready to jump into a project where I terrace some of this hill with more support. Otherwise, I think the mulch will just slide down this slope anyway. Earlier I mentioned watering as little as you can while keeping the soil appropriately moist. So how do you know how much water to achieve ideal soil moisture? You have to monitor it. In my experience, weather conditions and even different parts of the garden due to the soil composition in those areas, require a varied cadence for watering. You can set timers and on average get things watered okay, but I haven't found I can do that in an optimized way. Monitoring soil moisture, at least selectively if you're automating the water process, is still a crucial and good idea to ensure your plants are getting the right amount of water.
For example, when there are weather swings or you just planted starts, baby plants, in my case, since I'm not using a time system, I just monitor daily as I play in the garden.
If you want to be professional about it, you could use a soil moisture meter to check the moisture levels at the root zone. You see these in gadgets at garden stores, or you can pick them up off Amazon. Alternatively, I just use a finger in the dirt method. With your fingers, start by selecting a spot near the root zone of your plant. If you're growing veggies, you can assume that's probably around 6 inches or so away from the plant. This doesn't have to be precise. Root runs vary by plant, but that's good enough. Gently insert your finger into the soil up to the second knuckle, which is about 2 inches deep. Again, doesn't have to be precise. Your judgment on what's moist versus what's dry certainly won't be precise. When the soil feels dry, water your plants deeply and thoroughly. Make sure that the water reaches the root zone rather than just wetting the surface of the ground. Deep watering encourages roots to grow deep, and as I said earlier, we like that. It makes your plants more drought resistant. If the soil already feels moist at that depth, I'll hold off on watering for a few days and then check again. As I mentioned earlier, my goal is to water less frequently but more thoroughly. If the soil feels soggy, reduce your watering frequency and consider improving drainage. Overwatering can be just as bad, if not worse, for some plants. Since whenever possible I do my gardening when it's cooler in the morning, that's when I check the soil moisture. In the morning, it's also when the soil is likely to be the coolest and least affected by evaporation. Different areas of your garden may have different moisture levels due to the variations in sunlight, how many plants you have in that area, the density, your soil type. Be sure to check multiple spots. I don't water the whole garden on the same day because not every bed needs watering at the same time. And keep in mind that newly planted or young plants are going to need more frequent watering until their roots establish. As they grow, you can usually reduce the frequency of watering. With these watering tips, I hope your garden will thrive even during the dry summer months. Consistent, efficient watering is a key to maintaining a lush and productive garden. Don't forget to adjust your watering practices as the season changes and for your circumstances. Thank you for joining me in the garden today. I would appreciate a like, and if you aren't a subscriber, why not? Hit that subscribe. Until next time, happy gardening.
And if you see my prior video about living with the spearmint overgrowing this area, you can either view this as a disaster or take in its beauty.